Why is Apple reviving the iPod Touch?
And is it worth getting excited about the first 5G gadgets? Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by NetComm, taking Australian technology to the global market.
Welcome to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined as always by Adam Turner, a man who's already getting excited about 6G. Adam, are you feeling the need for speed?
Oh yeah. As my mates at high school used to say, you can never have too many Gs. At least I think they were talking about mobile data.
I'm sure they were. We're also joined this week by longtime friend of the show and Pickr.com.au editor, Leigh Stark. Leigh, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. It's always good to be here.
This week, we're trying to work out why Apple's revived the iPod Touch after letting it lie dormant for nearly half a decade, as well as playing around with the latest 5G gadgets to see if they really do live up to the hype. But first, it's time to check out this week's technology news. Adam, what's happening in tech?
It's Sony's turn to get Sims smashed by the ACCC, who's taken the entertainment giant to court over allegedly making false or misleading representations in dealing with customers of the Australian PlayStation Online store. The complaint revolves around Sony's refund policy for customers buying games as digital downloads, along with its policy that insisted that refunds could only be paid in virtual PlayStation currency instead of real money. The ACCC says Sony is in breach of Australian consumer law and is seeking penalties.
Huawei is set to fight its US ban by taking the US government to court, claiming that its ban is in breach of the US Constitution. The fact is, the US government has provided no evidence to show that Huawei is a security threat. There is no gun, no smoke, only speculation, said Dr. Song Lu Ping, Huawei's chief legal officer. The US government has yet to respond. Even Donald Trump hasn't taken to Twitter, which is, let's face it, highly unusual. Maybe his Huawei phone is broken.
Australians are seemingly hanging on to their smartphones for longer, with sales falling almost 20% in the first quarter of 2019 compared to the same time last year. Aussies are clearly more inclined to hold off on buying a new phone than people in other countries around the world, as the global decline in sales was only about 3%. Huawei has overtaken Apple to become the second biggest smartphone vendor worldwide, but Apple still retains top spot in Australia with Samsung second. Huawei only has a small slice of the Australian pie, which is unlikely to get any bigger considering its ongoing dispute with the US government.
Not content with making folks walk into you while you're making your way around the real world, Nintendo now wants to invade your dreams with Pokemon Sleep. Now, this isn't some kind of fancy Pikachu brothel, but instead a new game experience that will use a sleep tracker called, and I'm not making this up, the Pokemon Go Plus Plus, to provide entertainment experiences to poker fans while they doze. It'll be available next year for Android and iOS devices as an app, but the Pokemon Go Plus Plus will cost extra. So Adam, your favourite consumer advocate is donning the big green puffy fists and saying Sim Smash, this time towards Sony. What's the story here?
Yes, it's Sims Smash O'Clock. I mean, Sony has a bit of a history of not being the best when it comes to dealing with consumers. But this is a really interesting one. Basically, there are laws in terms of when you're entitled to a refund, whether something's considered fit for purpose, all those kind of things that apply if you walk into a shop and buy, a pair of shoes. Those same rules are supposed to apply in terms of digital purchases, but Sony was saying, oh, no, not really, unless the actual maker of the game admits that it's broken. We're not going to give you a refund. If you downloaded it more than 2 weeks ago, too bad. If you want a refund, you can have, PlayStation bucks, but not real money. And the ACCC's gone, that ain't going to fly. You've actually got to follow the rules. So, yeah, they've taken them to court. And, I mean, these are the people, Sony are the people who were putting spyware on CDs back in the 90s. So they've already got a bit of form when it comes to, not treating consumers well. Leigh, what do you think? Do you think that is this a common thing? Do you think the ACCC should be cracking down on the way digital products are treated?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you look, this sort of thing happened with Steam only too recently as well, with software for games, software for PCs and Macs, and it's the sort of thing I'm honestly surprised hasn't happened sooner. It's I look at it as an Android customer because you see that Google Play, for instance, lets you easily refund digital purchases like within the first 15 minutes to 24 hours, depending on what it is. But on a lot of other platforms, it's more of a, well, you didn't like it, put a request in and see what happens, and they might
Yeah.
respond. I think it's about time that somebody actually did that. Australia is very lucky to have a consumer watchdog paying as close attention as it does. And while, as I said, I'm surprised it's taken as long as it has, it's bloody good that someone is finally saying, you know what? That's actually not fair. They should be a little bit better to their customers.
I think the idea that you should only get refunded in store credit is total junk,
Mm.
and Sony deserves to be kicked in the junk for that. On the games front, though, I can't help but think, and it's not that people are not entitled to refunds in a lot of situations, but the way a lot of games ship these days, the way the industry works, is on this kind of endless bug fixing
Yeah.
run, and a lot of stuff to meet a deadline will ship, maybe with a few quirks here and there, but they might not actually pass that full not fit for purpose sniff test in every instance. Certainly, the ACCC's complaint highlights quite a few that totally should have been refunds. But I can't help but think that maybe there's some grounds here for saying, well, hang on, this doesn't work, but it will.
Maybe this is also a good opportunity to actually push back and say you've got to stop shipping half finished broken games, and rather than leaving it all on the, letting the end consumer wear it, pushing it back onto Sony, who will then perhaps push it back onto the games developers, might actually help improve that process, where Sony says, you can't be handing us a broken game to sell because we're going to end up wearing it.
But
I
then
like you, Adam. You're an optimist.
But then how many places around the world will actually support this sort of idea of getting a refund for games? I'm someone like I'm not an optimist or a pessimist. I'm a realist, and I worry that most game developers are going to sit there and go, it doesn't matter. Then in the real world, getting a game out without necessarily running it through QA and proper bug testing means that we're going to have more sales, and only 5% will actually bother returning it. I mean, there have been certainly some games that have come out in the past few years that you stick them in, they don't work, everyone complains, but no one really, I mean, short of selling that game or trying to sell the disc that you had online, you didn't have many options. You just kind of lumped it and complained about it online. This at least gives you, or at least gives Australians, the ability to say, no, not going to wear it. Actually, if this goes through, actually going to get a refund properly so I can buy a game that does mean something in real world value.
Hey, Adam, remember when the iPod was a thing?
The iPod, didn't Apple invent MP3s? Didn't Apple invent music? I'm sure they invented
Pretty
music.
much. Pretty much. But the iPod, it's
It was
it's not
huge.
much of a brand. But this week, Apple brought it back. There's a new iPod Touch, isn't there?
Yeah, and it's not, I think people kind of forget about the iPod. Like we're saying, they maybe forget about how big the iPod was back in the day. But I think a lot of people would be surprised to know that Apple even sells an iPod, because you can go to the to apple.com/au, whatever the Australian page, and look across the top. And there's not a menu option for the iPod. To be honest, I'm surprised there's still a menu option for Macs, but there's definitely not one for the iPod. And the time will come. You marked write down the number of the episode. All right, we can go back and point to it. I said that would happen. But yeah, all the old little iPods, the great little $99 bull clip sort of one,
The
was it
minis and
the
the
mini,
nanos and so on.
which were fantastic, and they must have sold an absolute buttload of those things. They're all gone, and the iPod Touch is the only thing that's left, and it's basically what, an iPhone 7 that can't make calls. Yes.
Yep.
Pretty much. It's running on the A10 Fusion processor. You've got a choice of storage variants depending on how much you want to spend. And in a lot of ways, it's sort of the cheap iPhone that people have wanted for a very long time, or at least have said they wanted. It's just that it's not a phone. Lee, do you reckon that's enough?
I don't actually understand what this release is about. When it came in this week, I was like, come on, just kill it already. It's a phone that doesn't make phone calls. And I saw online somebody said it's kind of like the beginner's version of iOS, and I was like, wait, but that's iOS in a nutshell. iOS is the beginner's version of iOS. It's meant to be simple and easy, and it doesn't need to be anything more than that. I don't know. I feel like this is kind of like a play for parents to buy their kids an iPhone when they know they don't need to make phone calls. So I get aspects of that. And meanwhile, I feel it's also kind of a play for like Nintendo Switch because we know that there are a lot of really good games on iOS, and we know that the iPad doesn't necessarily, as a 9.7-inch, relatively inexpensive tablet, doesn't really fill that same gap because it's big and it's, $460 odd dollars. I kind of feel like this is Apple saying, we need a portable game console that parents can buy for their kids, and we have this great selection of apps and games. Let's make this one relevant again.
So really, the iPod bit of it is irrelevant. It's
Kind
really
it's
an
just a name.
phoneless. Yeah, it's just a name. Yeah, so it's not really. They're still selling
I mean,
music players.
the
Well, they
iPad.
are,
They
and it
are,
still does.
but that's not the point of it,
I was
really.
going to say the iPad Air that they've got out now is an iPad Pro from like last year and the year before it, with a new name and two less speakers. So it's
Mm.
not necessarily
And a
an
new
iPad
hat.
Air. Yeah, basically, yeah. It's not necessarily an iPad Air. It's a name. This is still technically the iPod Touch from what 4 or 5 years ago. It's just got a different chip inside of it, and that's like maybe a different camera on the back. That's kind of it, right?
I
Well,
don't
it's
know.
got more storage, and I think I like it, and I think I get it a bit more than you do, Lee. You know I love to be contrary at the best of
Yes,
times, but
absolutely.
the thing is, for a lot of people, I think, the experience of using a smartphone increasingly doesn't have so much to do with it being a phone. There are tons of other communication methods you can use. You can use, well, you got to kind of fiddle around with it, to my understanding, WhatsApp, but you could use Facebook Messenger. You could use Skype. There's lots of other things that you could do with this to communicate with people that doesn't involve a SIM, doesn't involve a mobile plan, and you still get that same kind of app access you've already got. I think I agree with you that, yeah, it's a play towards kids. It's a play towards gamers because they've got the whole subscription Apple
Mm.
Arcade
And
thing
Apple
coming
Arcade,
up.
yeah.
But I think I get it. And I think it's also really, really good news if you are, and Adam was talking about this earlier in the news, the percentage of Australians who are holding on to older phones. If
Mm.
you've been holding on to an iPhone 7, the appearance of this iPod Touch is really good news for you because fundamentally this is an iPhone 7 without the phone bits,
Mm.
but it's brand new, and that means Apple will support it for the next couple of years. The architecture is the same as the iPhone 7. It suggests that they really don't have an argument to not support the iPhone 7 for another couple of years as well.
Yeah, that's fair.
I think a lot of iPhones probably become hand-me-down iPod Touches though, because I know that's happened in my house. My kids have both got old iPhones with no SIM cards in them, just to use as music players around the house. And to be honest, they don't really use them that much anymore because now we've got Google speakers and stuff, so it's easy to get music wherever you are. But so that was how somebody got an iPod in my house without me having to spend more money on an iPod. So I don't know if they're trying to target that audience, although my wife and I recently upgraded to iPhone XRs, and we traded our old iPhone 6s in, and they gave us like 150 or $200 for them, which I was really surprised at. So I think maybe Apple might have increased that trade-in price as well because they're trying to get old phones out of circulation because they don't like. It's the same way that Sony or the games makers hate the secondhand games market because they don't make any money out of it. Apple hates you giving your iPhone to someone else, whatever they're going to do with it. So by trying to get them out of the circulation, saying, "Look, use this $300 iPod Touch for the same job," maybe that's their thinking.
Well, it keeps your brand loyal, but the pricing thing's kind of fascinating. We keep saying, this is an iPhone 7 without the phone bits, and it mostly
There's
is.
no water
I
resistance in
haven't
it,
seen
is there?
No, we haven't seen a full teardown. It's not quite like for like, but it's similar architectures. And the thing is, Apple still sells the iPhone 7. You can get a 32 gig iPhone 7 for $749, or you can get a 32 gig iPod Touch for $299. That's quite a margin.
But no, there's a massive difference in screen size there as well. I mean, the iPhone 7 is what technically a 4.7 inch screen, whereas this is the old style iPhone SE 4-inch screen. I mean, is this smaller than iPhone SE? This is a 4-inch diagonal screen. It's tiny in the grand scheme of things. So you're paying for a smaller device in and of itself, not just an iPhone 7 without a mobile chip.
I think once you get down to those sizes, a lot of people are not, unless they put them side by side, I would argue a lot of people are not necessarily going to pick that, though. You're not wrong, but I don't know at that end of the market if it matters that much.
So, Alex, as we said last week, 5G is here. 5G is here, waving his arms around in the air. We actually got our hands on a few 5G gadgets this week. What did we see come from Telstra?
Yeah, so we knew Telstra was going to launch, and we talked a little bit about this last week. This week, it was all about the devices, because you can build a great network in very, very small areas of the country, but it's not much good if you don't actually have anything that can access that network. So this week, Telstra showed off 3 of the devices you're going to be able to get on Telstra 5G plans. They've got their first mobile hotspot product, the HTC 5G Hub, and 2 phones, the Samsung Galaxy S10 5G and the Oppo Reno 5G. So the first thing that showed off was, and the first one that we knew was coming in any case, was the HTC 5G Hub, which they've been talking about since last year. And it's an evolution of the mobile hotspots that Telstra's actually had for years. They used to be, well, they were Netgear, and before that they were Sierra Wireless, because Sierra Wireless got bought by Netgear. Now they've switched camps to HTC for what is basically an Android phone in a fat little body with a custom launcher on it.
Wait, HTC makes phones?
Apparently so.
Who knew?
That's cruel.
Sorry.
That is a little cruel.
They've been missing for
They've been
almost
missing in action.
nothing this
And
year.
they were the
They make
leaders.
VR headsets now.
Yeah.
An awful lot of HTC went over to Google. Those whole Pixel phones are basically
That's true.
HTCs, let's face it. But
True. Yeah.
the hub itself is running on a Snapdragon 855 processor. It's running on Android 9, but you really wouldn't know it to play with it. I had the chance to go hands-on with it, and you are super limited in what you can officially do. Now, I'm sure once these are in the hands of people, clever types will work out ways to sideload apps and do things. And Telstra did show off a few games running on it, but they were really cagey about how that all works at the launch.
Why would you want to run a game? Isn't the whole point to save the battery life so you can use it for mobile broadband? How would you want to run a game on it?
It's got a large battery on it, though, and you might just be sitting there idling time while you're waiting for the bus. You know, it's not the worst idea in the world, because this thing has like a 5-inch screen. What else are you going to do with it?
Yeah.
It doesn't sound like it's designed for just throwing in your bag for going down the cafe and working while you're having a coffee. The size of it looks like it's almost like for a mobile office or for something like that.
Well, it doesn't even need Android running on it if it was being built like that anyway. It does seem like HTC has shoehorned a phone into a mobile hotspot.
Because it was just easier to do that.
Yeah,
Maybe.
the size is. I think it's probably a little smaller than you think it is, Adam. But I will say this: if the listeners have used the existing Nighthawk mobile routers that Telstra's been selling for a while, it's not dissimilar to those. This is still a big chunky thing, so it's not going to be easily pocketable. They certainly wouldn't let me walk out with one, but it's not.
And he tried.
It's certainly something you could sling into a bag, or into a purse or something like that. Largest purse, I guess. But it's not something. It's not the size of a traditional home modem or anything like that. Although that enterprise play is definitely something they're interested in, because they do have separate business plans for this thing, which are for some reason slightly worse than the consumer plans. What was really interesting with this, though, was because this was the first event they had, it was the first opportunity I had to directly ask Telstra, right, how fast is your 5G going to be? Because we talked about this last week. They were being really cagey about it. And they eventually and very reluctantly said that their expectation would be that it would be twice the speed of existing 4G, but it would improve over time. Now, I'll give them a pass on the improve over time bit, because that's definitely the case. We're very early in 5G iterations. The software will improve, their radios will improve, and in fact, their spectrum will improve when they get access to millimeter wave sometime next year post-auction of that stuff. So the network itself will improve, that's true. But I was able to run a few sneaky little speed tests hooking up a Huawei P30 Pro to the HTC 5G hub, and I was not blown away by the speeds, I've got to say.
So we got slightly different speeds with the Oppo Reno at the launch this week. So I noticed that at the Samsung Galaxy S10 when we were there, that was only getting about 1200 megabits
About
a
that, yep.
second, which is not. It's not. I mean, that's not slow, but that's certainly within parameters for 4G. That's what category 16 4G or category 18
Yep.
4G around that. So it's not. It's just not amazing 5G. Tonight, at the launch, Oppo managed to show 1926.
So 1926 is great. For the HTC, I hit 90.
90.
90 was as good as I got. Now,
Wow.
I suppose there are some caveats there. Wi-Fi hotspot devices are notorious for this. They're always going to be lossy because it's getting the signal in and then got to pump it back out. What I really want to do with this thing is get hold of it, use the Ethernet port, connect that up to something and see what it can just get down without that loss factor, without that interference factor in play. But it does also highlight something, which is 5G can be fast. It's not always going to be fast because that HTC test was about 15 minutes before the Samsung test where I saw, 1.2 gig flying down on 5G. So I think people are going to see a lot of variance on that. And I think you've got to be ready for that too.
The same with 3G, 4G. Anyone who's ever used mobile broadband sees that it can vary from time to time and place to place.
And also varies where you're going to be. I mean, the pockets of 5G at the moment are crazy small. I mean, Queensland, for once, is like the luckiest place for seeing it, but because there are just more cities, like 3, I guess. There are 3 cities in Queensland versus 1 in every other state that has access to 5G. But if you don't live, like in Sydney, for example, if you don't live in the very center, or strangely, for once, where I am, in the inner west, on the edges of where the inner west kind of become the inner west between the fish markets and Leichhardt, you won't have access to it. You'll be stuck on regular 4G, and that's supposed to be, I guess, until sometime next year. I'm not even sure when that's supposed to reach more places.
Well, technically speaking, actually, Tasmania gets second best. They have 2 cities, Hobart and Launceston. Both have some 5G coverage. But you're right, the coverage areas are not great. What's kind of curious about this is that Telstra said for the HTC at least, and for the Samsung, I'm not so sure about the Oppo, but they actually said they are advertising these nationwide. You can get them nationwide, although anecdotally, the experience and the feedback that I got from one vertical hold listener was that they went in to try and get an S10 5G because they were very, very keen, even though they're not in a 5G area, only to have their Telstra store say, oh, we won't have those for a couple of months, and we don't think we'll have 5G for a couple of years.
Oh, man.
Now, we did actually get some quotes from Telstra this week about that. They say at the moment their 5G footprint includes areas where 4 million people live, work, or pass through every day. That made me laugh. So you know that 5 minutes you'll get a glimpse of 5G on your way from where you live and on the way to work, and then another 5-minute glimpse of it on the way home. But what was a bit more encouraging is they said that over the next 12 months, they expect the coverage to increase in area almost 5-fold and extend to at least 35 Australian cities. Now, if that's increasing...
I thought you were going to say to extend to at least 35 Australians. I was thinking, cool, great.
It's just the executives and their extended family. But so that 5-fold increase in ground area, assuming that's spreading out from the center of Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, that should cover a lot of people. But yeah, we saw the same thing with 4G. I reckon when 4G started, it had an even smaller footprint in Melbourne than what the first 5G does. I remember having to practically be inside the CBD to test stuff. And now 5G's from, I think, Carlton to Richmond and, the Docklands over to, I can't even remember where it was. But yeah, so it's...
I think Melbourne Airport's got a chunk of it as well, but yes.
Oh, yeah, Melbourne Airport always gets... Because I don't live far from the airport and I've spent a lot of time out there in the middle of the night sitting in a car next to the airport testing mobile hotspots, waiting for security to come around and ask me what the hell I was doing. I was going to get Alex to bail me out. Oh, I know this guy. It's all right.
I mean, the other side of it is obviously cost. I mean, the one thing that we're all kind of banging on about from this week is the prices of 5G are just staggeringly high. I
Mm.
mean, early adoption always carries with it a tax, basically, but this is just severe. I think it's what a minimum of $130 for 3 gig and handset repayments, basically.
Yeah, and I want to get onto the actual hardware of the phones because I think this is another part of the story. But yeah, the cheapest Samsung plan will run you $3,408 over 2 years. That's for a plan with 3 gig. And
Crazy.
sorry, if you're going 5G, you don't want just 3 gig of data. It's kind of ridiculous that
Nope.
it's even there.
Mm.
It'd go in 10
But if
seconds.
you take exactly, or less,
Well, not at 90 meg,
yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, in theory.
no, that's true. But if you take
That's
out
a
the actual
safety. It's actually it's not a bug. It's a safety feature.
if you take out the actual plan costs from that, it suggests that the actual phone, the phone handset repayments on that plan run to $1,992. And typically with phones on a contract, they're subsidized. Samsung hasn't said how much the S10 5G will cost when and if we can buy it outright. Oppo at least has said what the Reno 5G is worth. But that means it's going to be a
Yeah, it's
2 grand plus
$1,500.
phone.
Mm.
And this does flip over to the other side of it, which is the rest of the hardware. And both Samsung and Oppo are at
Mm.
pains to say that their cameras are pretty great. And Leigh, I know you're a camera guy. Are you impressed by the
Mm.
approach that either has taken?
I'm probably more impressed by what Oppo has done, just simply because I like the idea of, I mean, as evidence from the P30 Pro, I like the idea of a triple camera with a larger sensor and a periscope style of zoom. I mean, it's not the same configuration as the P30 Pro from Huawei. This is similar. It's a telescope style lens set up, or sorry, a periscope style lens set up in a telephoto configuration with a large sensor to kind of offset and create hybrid zoom. I'm more impressed, I guess, by that than what Samsung has done. Samsung's one's interesting because it's very quite clearly a different phone from what the Galaxy S10 Plus is. And the reason why that confuses me is because a couple months ago, you would have, still up to, I guess, this week, you would have had Telstra and Samsung stores actively telling people the S10 Plus is the flagship phone. It's got all the great things. And now this one's come along, and it's a very similar phone, but throwing in that depth sensor on the back and on the front, increasing the screen size and battery, those are all things that actually now make the S10 Plus kind of inferior when you look at it in the grand scheme of things. It's still a flagship, but it's not the flagship. So I guess what I'm trying to say is I like the approach of Oppo's phone and camera, because at least it makes sense. And if you jump between them, the Oppo Reno 5G is almost like it's identical to the Oppo Reno 4G. It's just one's 4G and one's not. I mean, that's the gist of it. The Samsung one, I'm thoroughly confused by, because if I knew someone who had bought an S10 Plus at the beginning, not on Telstra, for instance, but on somewhere else, and then they were told that the S10 5G, which is a different camera and a different phone altogether, is now out, I'd probably be a little pissed off.
Yeah, Samsung's release strategy, of course, I think this year's been slightly mucked up by the whole Galaxy Fold issue, which we've covered in previous
Mm.
episodes. But you mentioned that there's the 4G version of the Oppo Reno, which is confusingly the Oppo Reno 10 times zoom.
That's just such a
And
confusing name.
it's the same phone, but for dual SIM capability, depending on whether or not you get it with a carrier. That's for the 10 times. It's single SIM only for the Reno 5G. And that 5G modem. And it's a $300 difference, which is a fair bit to pay for a modem.
Absolutely. I mean, but that said, it's a 5G device, and the early adopters tax is always going to be on that 5G thing to begin with. We're going to see that. Like, what have we got? The
The
V40, I think,
V50 is
next
the
week. V50. So I can
From
never
LG.
remember
Yeah.
which V we're up to, but yeah, I think all those 5G phones are going to have an early adopters tax. But at least I appreciate from the Oppo perspective that the phones are largely the same. So if you want to spend $1,200 or $1,500, you're getting the same phone. You're just using a different modem. Samsung's one kind of confuses me because you're not, and every one of those devices, S10, S10e, S10 Plus, S10 5G, are all clearly different. And it's not an approach Apple technically takes between the the 10s and 10s Max. It's not something Google really takes for the Pixel 3, Pixel 3 XL. It's something Samsung is actively doing this year, and I don't like it personally, because I think it kind of I don't want to say it screws customers, but a part of me feels like it kind of does. It certainly didn't if you bought it on Telstra during a certain time, but you might not also want to upgrade to a bigger phone. You might just want that better camera configuration, and you're not going to get that between them, I
You might want
guess.
a battery that might last a little bit longer, because the one thing I think Samsung's gotten badly wrong this year is battery life.
Not to mention firmware
Well,
upgrades.
yeah, there is that too. But I guess we will
Hi,
have to.
Jen, if you're listening on another phone, because you're clearly not listening on that phone.
You've just run out of battery life just then.
But I guess the thing is, we will have to wait for cheaper 5G devices down the track, and possibly for when there's competition, because that's the other thing with this Oppo phone. At some point, we know it's coming to Optus, because Oppo managed to get Telstra and Optus on the same stage at MWC to show this thing off. But Oppo is, I understand, being a bit cagey about when that's going to happen, just talking about network availability, because, of course, all Optus is doing with its 5G at the moment is fixed broadband.
And I think I heard today that MediaTek also had some 5G chipsets coming along. And obviously, we know that not they're not the lower quality, but they're often made for mid and budget range handsets. So you can more or less expect, I guess, an Alcatel or other brands to use some of the MediaTek chips later on, because that's what they kind of do. They provide cost effective chips. I guess you know what, if the Samsung doesn't work for you and the Oppo doesn't work for you and the LG doesn't, you can always use an HTC 5G hub to make phone calls when someone cracks the thing, because it's basically a 5G phone that doesn't work as a phone right now. Kind of like an iPod Touch, basically.
I'm having flashbacks to the Nokia N-Gage of people putting stupidly large things up to their head. Well, folks, that's just about it for another fine episode of Vertical Hold. What do you think? Should Sony be forced to hand out refunds en masse? Are you keen on a cheaper, phoneless iPhone in the iPod Touch? Has 5G's thrill worn off now that we've got actual devices? Send us your feedback via Twitter or the Vertical Hold Facebook page. Thanks to Leigh for joining us for the show.
Always a pleasure, guys.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Remember, we really appreciate it if you can give us a shout out, leave us a review on your podcasting platform of choice, and help us spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by NetComm, taking Australian technology to the global market.
I shot a man with an Oppo Reno once, just to watch him die.